I was just another corporate slave grinding away in a concrete jungle. My life was a repetitive cycle of overtime, coffee, and crushing debt. One night, I was stumbling home after a shift that lasted forever. Out of nowhere, Truck Kuan appeared, moving faster than my boss dodging a promotion request. The impact was instant, and I felt my soul leaving my body. I expected the afterlife, but I woke up in a massive, silk-covered bed. I rushed to the mirror and saw a face that was incredibly handsome. My jaw hit the floor. I had more glow-up than a K-pop idol after a 3-year hiatus. A glowing blue screen suddenly flickered to life right before my eyes. A cold, mechanical voice announced that the God-level system was now active. Oh great, another system plot, because we definitely haven't seen 1,000 of these this week. It turns out I was now the most hated young master in the Empire. My reputation was so bad that even the servants looked at me with disgust. The door slammed open and a maid rushed in, looking absolutely terrified. She started crying and screaming that I had finally returned from the dead. I tried to speak, but my voice sounded like smooth, expensive velvet. A massive wave of memories suddenly surged into my brain all at once. Apparently, my father was planning to disown me faster than a politician caught in a scandal. I was being sent to the border to fight monsters as a punishment. I looked at the screen and realized my new life was a total cliché. I pulled up my status window to check my current stats. My reputation stat was currently sitting lower than a crypto scammer's. The maid was still shaking like a leaf, waiting for me to lash out. My attempt at a reassuring smile only made her scream and bolt. Note to self, my face is a 10, but my personality is apparently a biohazard. I stood up and felt a sudden, weird surge of energy buzzing through my veins. The system chimed in with my first quest: survive the border or die trying. The reward for completion was a legendary sword of immense power. A squad of guards marched inside the second the door burst open. Their captain looked at me with more contempt than a food critic at a gas station. He announced that the carriage was ready to haul me off to my new home. And by new home, he meant a literal death trap crawling with hungry monsters. I walked out of the mansion, and the sunlight was way too cheerful for my exile. A crowd had gathered outside just to watch the trash young master get the boot. Someone threw a rotten tomato, but I dodged it with surprising ease. I climbed into the carriage, which was nothing more than a wooden cage. As we rattled away, I took one last look at the massive, expensive estate. I didn't give a damn about the money. I just wanted to make it through the day alive. The system screen flickered again, offering me a newbie survival gift pack. Finally, a loot box that doesn't require my credit card. Let's see what I got. I tapped the open button, praying for a legendary drop and not just a slap in the face. A golden light blinded me, and the system announced my first item with a triumphant chime. It was a novice cultivation pill that smelled suspiciously like old gym socks and broken dreams. The description said it would clear my meridians, which sounds about as fun as a root canal. I swallowed the pill, and my stomach immediately started doing Olympic-level backflips. A heat wave surged through my body like I'd just swallowed a literal sun. My skin started oozing black gunk that smelled worse than a dumpster in the middle of July. Great, the classic body cleansing trope. I guess I'm a human charcoal filter now, and the smell is definitely not FDA approved. The carriage hit a massive bump, nearly sending me face first into my own toxic sludge. The guards outside started laughing, probably betting on whether I'd die from the exile or the stench. I ignored the haters and checked my new stats, which were actually starting to look respectable. My strength had jumped from wet noodle to slightly overcooked pasta, which is progress, I guess. Suddenly, the carriage screeched to a halt, and the horses sounded like they were seeing a ghost. A roar echoed through the forest, loud enough to make my teeth rattle in my skull. The captain drew his sword, his face turning whiter than a sheet of paper. A pack of shadow wolves emerged from the trees, looking for a high-protein midnight snack. Of course, the first encounter is a bunch of level 1 mobs right on schedule. It's like the plot is following a checklist. The system pinged with a new objective: defeat the alpha or become premium dog food. I looked at my hands, which were still shaking, and gripped a rusty dagger I found under the seat. It was time to see if this trash young master could actually survive the tutorial. I kicked the carriage door open and tumbled out into the cold, damp forest air. The guards were already losing ground, their swords clashing against claws in a desperate struggle. Then I saw the alpha, a massive beast with eyes like burning coals and a serious attitude problem. The system flashed a warning in my face like a persistent pop-up ad for a sketchy mobile game. I gripped my rusty dagger, feeling the pill's energy surging through my limbs like a caffeine overdose. This dagger was so dull I'd probably have better luck insulting the wolf's mother than actually cutting it. The alpha lunged at me, a blur of shadow and teeth that smelled like a wet dog's nightmare. I rolled to the side, my body moving with a grace I definitely didn't have 5 minutes ago. My heart was pounding, but the fear was being replaced by a strange, cold focus. I saw an opening in its guard and lunged forward with everything I had. The rusty blade sank into the beast's neck, painting me in a spray of hot blood. The alpha let out a pathetic whimper before crashing into the dirt like a sack of potatoes. The remaining wolves saw their leader go down and immediately decided they weren't that hungry after all. They vanished back into the shadows, leaving me standing there covered in grime and wolf blood. The guards stared at me with their mouths open, looking like NPCs whose AI just completely broke down. I ignored their shocked expressions and checked the loot notification that popped up in my vision. I had gained a level, and my strength stat finally moved out of the pathetic category. The system rewarded me with a shadow wolf fong and a small bag of copper coins. I guess the plot armor is finally kicking in, and it's about time because my luck was hitting zero. I climbed back into the carriage, ready to see what other disasters the world had in store. The carriage started moving again, the wheels creaking like a haunted house door on a budget. I leaned back against the hard wooden seat, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, or maybe it was just the cheap pill wearing off. The guards kept glancing back at me, looking like they'd just seen a glitch in the Matrix. "Young master, are you alright?" One of them finally managed to stutter out. I didn't bother answering, mostly because I was too busy staring at the floating system screen. It was time to distribute my new stat points and stop being a walking target. I dumped everything into agility, because if I can't tank a hit, I'd better be able to run away. Suddenly, the carriage screeched to a halt, nearly throwing me off my seat again. I groaned, wondering if the universe had a personal vendetta against my spine. A group of men in black robes blocked the path, looking like a low-budget cult meeting. Their leader stepped forward, holding a scroll that looked suspiciously like a bounty poster. "Hand over the boy, and we might let the rest of you live," he announced with zero originality. The guards looked at each other, and I could practically see their loyalty bars dropping to zero. I sighed and stepped out of the carriage, my new agility stat making me feel light on my feet. "You guys really need a better hobby than kidnapping teenagers," I said, crossing my arms. The leader sneered, his hand moving toward the hilt of a very expensive-looking sword. He moved faster than the wolf, but to my boosted senses, he looked like he was underwater. I dodged his first strike with an inch to spare, feeling the wind whistle past my ear. This was going to be a long day, and I really wished I had a snack for this fight. The leader's eyes widened, clearly not expecting me to move like a caffeinated ninja. "Where did a brat like you learn to move like that?" he growled, sounding genuinely offended. I just smirked, because explaining a literal cheat code to a cultist is a total waste of breath. He swung again, but his form was sloppier than my aim in a first-person shooter after 3 energy drinks. I ducked under the blade and delivered a solid punch right to his solar plexus. He wheezed, his face turning a lovely shade of purple that matched his tacky robe. The other cultists stood there frozen, probably waiting for their turn in this turn-based RPG logic. "Don't just stand there, you idiots. Kill him," the leader gasped out. They all charged at once, which is usually the game over screen for any normal person. But with my agility cranked up, it felt like I was playing on easy mode. I danced through their ranks, tripping one and shoving another into a nearby tree. One guy tried to grab me, but I slipped through his fingers like a wet bar of soap. I grabbed a discarded sword from the ground, feeling the weight settle in my hand. Even though I'd never trained, the system made me feel like a legendary sword saint. I parried a strike and countered with a slash that sent a cultist flying backward. The leader finally recovered, drawing a second dagger with a look of pure desperation. He screamed, "You're dead meat," which is basically the "I'm about to lose" catchphrase for every mid-tier villain. I stepped to the side and let him run face first into the side of the carriage. The sound of his head hitting the wood was more satisfying than seeing a skip ad button on a long video. I stood over him, wondering if I should loot his body or just keep moving. I decided to go for the loot because, let's be real, passing up free items is a sin punishable by the gaming gods. I reached into his robe and pulled out a small, glowing jade pendant. The system immediately pinged, identifying it as a soul-binding talisman. Great, more spooky cultist gear that probably has a higher chance of cursing me than a sketchy pop-up ad. I stuffed it into my pocket and turned my attention to the carriage. Inside, I found a young girl huddled in the corner, looking absolutely terrified. Her eyes were wide, and she was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. "Are you the one who saved me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I gave her my most heroic smile, though I probably looked more like a creep who just found a $20 bill. "Don't worry, kid, the bad guys are currently taking a permanent nap outside." She crawled out of the carriage, still looking at me like I was some kind of alien. I realized then that she was dressed in high-quality silks, definitely not a commoner. "I am Li Myling, daughter of the city lord," she said, trying to regain her dignity. Oh boy, a damsel in distress who's also a VIP. My quest reward senses were tingling. She thanked me profusely, promising that her father would reward me handsomely. I told her to save the gratitude for when we were actually out of the woods. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the forest, making the ground tremble. My system interface flashed red, displaying a warning message I really didn't want to see. A massive shadow emerged from the trees, looking like a grizzly bear that had spent way too much time on a protein-only diet. I gripped my sword tighter, realizing the tutorial phase was officially over. The beast let out a roar that smelled like it hadn't brushed its teeth since the Ming Dynasty. Li Myling shrieked and hid behind me, pulling the classic damsel in distress move from every C-tier manhwa. My system screen popped up, level 15 Iron Claw Bear, danger level, lethal. Lethal? I'm barely level 5. This game's balancing is officially worse than a day 1 Ubisoft release. The bear lunged forward, its claws tearing through the air. I barely managed to roll out of the way, feeling the wind from its swipe. If that hit me, I'd be nothing but a red stain on the forest floor. I swung my sword at its flank, but the blade just bounced off its fur. It was like trying to cut a brick wall with a butter knife. The bear swung its massive paw again, catching me right in the chest. I flew backward, hitting a tree with a thud that shook the leaves. My HP bar dropped faster than a crypto coin after a bad tweet from a billionaire. Warning, HP below 20%. Critical state detected. The system's red warning lights were practically blinding me now. Lee Myling cried out my name, but I was too busy tasting copper to respond. I struggled to stand, using my sword as a makeshift crutch. The bear stood on its hind legs, preparing for the final blow. Just as I thought it was game over, a blue light erupted from the soul-binding talisman. The pendant I just looted began to glow with an intense, blinding light. A surge of power flowed through my veins, and suddenly, I was ready for round 2. The energy felt like a triple-shot espresso injected directly into my soul. System, soul-binding talisman activated. Temporary buff, Godslayer mode. The bear stopped mid-swing, looking as confused as a boomer trying to find the any key. I gripped my sword, and this time, the blade was humming with blue electricity. I didn't just stand up, I exploded forward like a glitching speedrunner. My sword sliced through the bear's tough hide like it was soft-serve ice cream. The beast let out a pathetic whimper that definitely didn't match its lethal rating. I spun around for a follow-up, feeling lighter than my bank account after a Steam Summer sale. Skill unlocked. Thunderclap strike. Cost 50 MP. I slammed the blade down, and a bolt of lightning turned the bear into a giant charcoal briquette. The massive creature collapsed, shaking the ground and probably waking up the neighbors. Lee Myling stared at me with those huge anime eyes that take up about 90% of her skull. Quest complete. Defeat the Iron Claw Bear. Rewards 500 XP, 10 gold. A golden light washed over me as my level jumped from 5 to 8 instantly. The adrenaline faded, leaving me feeling like I'd just finished a 24-hour gaming marathon. Lee Myling ran over, asking if I was okay while checking if the loot was safe. I told her I was fine, but my dignity was going to need a few healing potions. I looked at the talisman, which was now just a dull piece of rock again. If this thing has a long cooldown, I'm basically toast the next time a squirrel looks at me funny. Suddenly, a dark shadow fell over us, and I realized the bear was just the appetizer. I looked up and saw a creature that made the previous bear look like a misunderstood puppy. It was a shadow-winged tiger, looking like a rejected Pokemon design that went through a serious goth phase. Lee Myling grabbed my arm, so hard, I thought my bones were about to become powder. Warning, level 25 boss monster detected. Survival probability, extremely low. My MP bar was currently emptier than a movie theater showing a documentary on the history of beige paint. The tiger let out a roar that literally rattled my teeth inside my skull. Just as it prepared to pounce, a streak of white light slammed into the ground between us. A guy in fancy silk robes descended from the sky, looking way too clean for this forest. He didn't even look at the tiger. He just adjusted his hair like he was posing for a commercial. "Step aside, peasants," he said, his voice dripping with more unearned confidence than a crypto bro. Oh great, it's an arrogant young master archetype because the universe clearly hasn't met its cliché quota for the day. He waved a folding fan and sent a gust of wind that actually pushed the massive tiger back. "This beast is mine," he declared, "and so is the core of that bear you just killed." Lee Myling stepped forward, shouting that we were the ones who did all the actual work. The young master just laughed, a high-pitched sound that made me want to punch him. He released his aura, and the pressure felt like someone had parked a semi-truck on my chest. I swear, if I have to deal with one more arrogant rich kid, I'm calling the manager of this entire genre. New quest, face the arrogance. Objective, don't let this clown steal your hard-earned loot. Reward, hidden technique, the art of the divine face slap. I gripped my sword again, wondering if my plot armor was thick enough to survive this encounter. The young master flicked his wrist, and his folding fan transformed into a glowing jade blade. He charged at the shadow-winged tiger with incredible speed, his robes fluttering in the wind. The tiger swiped at him, but he dodged the massive claws with effortless grace. "Azure Wind Slash," he shouted, because apparently, you can't use a move without announcing it first. The move name was so generic I'm surprised he didn't have to pay a licensing fee to every other cultivation novel. A wave of energy sliced through the tiger's shoulder, spraying dark blood across the grass. The beast whimpered, and for a second, I actually felt bad for the oversized kitty. The young master turned to me, his eyes filled with absolute disdain and cold arrogance. "Hand over the bear's core now, and I might let you leave with all your limbs attached." I looked at my limbs, then at him, wondering if he realized he was talking to the guy with the plot armor. Lee Myling stepped in front of me, her face red with a mix of anger and genuine terror. He just laughed and waved his hand, sending a shockwave that knocked her back several feet. Warning, boss monster is entering enraged state. Attack power increased by 200%. The shadow-winged tiger's eyes turned blood red, and its fur began to smoke like a burnt toaster. Great, it's phase 2 of the boss fight, and I'm still stuck at level 1 with a starter sword. The young master's smug expression finally cracked as the tiger let out a sound like a jet engine. He tried to swing his jade blade again, but the tiger was suddenly moving with terrifying speed. With one brutal swipe, the tiger sent the arrogant young master flying into a very sturdy-looking oak tree. He hit that tree so hard his ancestors probably felt the whiplash through the afterlife. Now it was just me, a very angry tiger, and a quest reward that was starting to look really tempting. The shadow-winged tiger turned its glowing red eyes toward me, and suddenly, I was the main course. I gripped my rusty starter sword so hard my knuckles turned whiter than a ghost in a flower factory. Ding. New quest. Survive the enraged tiger or become very expensive fertilizer. Thanks, system. Your motivational speeches are truly the highlight of my miserable transmigration. The beast lunged, covering the distance faster than a clickbait thumbnail attracts a bored teenager. I rolled to the side, feeling the heat of its breath singe the back of my neck. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a drum solo at a heavy metal concert. I swung my sword at its flank, but the blade just bounced off its fur like a plastic toy. This sword has the cutting power of a wet noodle, and I'm starting to take it personally. The tiger swiped again, and I barely managed to parry with the flat of my blade. Lee Miling screamed for me to run, but my legs were currently busy having a panic attack. Just leave me and save yourself, she cried, hitting all the classic damsel in distress tropes. I ignored her, mostly because I knew the plot wouldn't let me die in Chapter 3. Suddenly, I saw a glowing red pixel right under the tiger's left wing, a classic video game weak spot. It was glowing so brightly, I'm surprised it didn't have a giant "hit here" sign flashing in neon. I gathered every bit of chi I had left, which was basically enough to power a light bulb. I lunged forward, aiming straight for that glowing patch of fur with everything I had. Meanwhile, the young master was still dangling from the oak tree like a discarded Christmas ornament. His azure wind pride was currently being humbled by a very sturdy piece of timber. My blade sank deep into the tiger's chest, and the world exploded into a shower of golden sparks. The shadow-winged tiger let out one last pathetic wheeze and dissolved into a cloud of golden light. Ding. Quest Survive the Enraged Tiger complete. Rewards, 500 XP and a basic healing pill. I leveled up, and the sudden rush of energy felt better than finding a $20 bill in my old jeans. My muscles were screaming louder than a Karen who was just told the ice cream machine is broken. Lee Miling rushed over, her eyes wider than the plot holes in a low-budget cultivation movie. You actually did it, she gasped, looking at me like I'd just performed a literal miracle. I tried to look cool, but I was mostly just trying not to vomit from pure exhaustion. I reached into the tiger's remains and pulled out a glowing, fist-sized core that pulsed with power. Item acquired, shadow-winged essence. Value, extremely high. Great, so I'm basically walking around with a giant rob me sign over my head now. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the clearing as the oak tree finally gave up on life. The young master hit the ground with a thud that probably rearranged his internal organs. He scrambled to his feet, desperately trying to brush the dirt off his expensive silk robes. Humph, I had it under control, he barked, his ego clearly more inflated than a balloon at a 5-year-old's birthday party. I rolled my eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't get stuck in the back of my head. Sure you did, buddy, I muttered, and I'm the secret emperor of the universe. Lee Miling ignored his posturing and pointed toward the dark cave the tiger had been guarding. A chilling wind blew out from the entrance, carrying the heavy scent of ancient decay. The system pinged a warning, telling me that my plot armor was currently at 15% durability. I stepped into the darkness, because apparently, I have zero survival instincts when loot is involved. The cave walls were dripping with some kind of glowing slime that looked like radioactive snot from a giant with a cold. I held my breath, half expecting a jump scare from a low-budget horror movie. Stay close, Lee Miling whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Behind us, the young master was still complaining about his robes, sounding like a spoiled influencer who lost their Wi-Fi. Warning, high-level energy signature detected ahead, and it's definitely not a friendly welcome party. The air grew colder, and my breath hitched in my chest like a frozen engine. We rounded a corner and saw a massive stone altar bathed in an eerie violet light. Floating above the altar was a sword that looked way too cool for a starter zone. The Heaven Sunderer, the young master gasped, his eyes turning into literal dollar signs. He shoved past me, his greed clearly overriding his 2 remaining brain cells, which were already fighting for third place. I reached out to stop him, but he was already lunging for the blade. As soon as his hand touched the hilt, a massive shockwave sent him flying backward. System, unauthorized user detected. Activating anti-simp defense measures to protect the sacred blade. A spectral guardian materialized out of the shadows, looking like a boss fight I wasn't ready for. It was 10 feet tall, made of smoke, and definitely didn't look like it wanted to talk things out. My plot armor dropped to 10%, which is basically the same level as my phone battery when I'm stuck in an Uber. Great, I muttered, because fighting one mythical beast today just wasn't enough. The Guardian raised a massive, ethereal blade, targeting the young master first. Lee Miling jumped into a defensive stance, looking like a total badass while I just panicked. I gripped my own weapon, wondering if the system had any easy mode buttons I missed. The Guardian swung its massive smoke blade, cutting through the air with a terrifying whistle. I dove to the side, barely avoiding a haircut I definitely didn't ask for. The young master was still on the floor, groaning like he'd just been told he couldn't use his dad's credit card. Lee Myling parried a blow, her sword clashing against the spectral energy in a shower of sparks. "Don't just stand there," she shouted, while I was busy trying not to pass out. System, quest updated, survive the vibe check of the ancient guardian. I couldn't believe the system was actually calling this life or death battle a vibe check. The guardian let out a roar that sounded like 1,000 angry Karens demanding to see the manager. I gripped my sword, feeling my palms get sweatier than a gamer in a final circle. The ground beneath us began to crack as the guardian channeled more violet energy. Myling launched herself forward, moving with a grace that I could only dream of having. I noticed a glowing rune on the guardian's chest that looked like a classic boss weak point. "Aim for the glowing bit," I yelled, finally finding my voice amidst the chaos. The young master finally stood up, his face twisted in a mix of fear and arrogance. He pulled out a high-grade talisman, probably worth more than my entire life insurance policy. He threw it at the guardian, but the smoke monster just swatted it away like a fly. The talisman exploded harmlessly against the wall, wasting enough gold to buy a small kingdom. I realized then that if I didn't do something, we were all going to end up as spectral snacks. I charged forward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a drum solo at a heavy metal concert. I swung my blade at the rune, praying to the gods of plot armor that I wouldn't miss. My blade scraped against the rune, producing a screech that made my teeth ache. The guardian let out a howl of pain, shaking its entire body like a glitchy NPC in a Bethesda game. The purple smoke scattered in every direction, acting like it just saw its own browser history being leaked. The recoil sent me flying backward, and I hit the ground like a discarded soda can. "Did we win?" I gasped, my eyes fixed on the swirling mist. The smoke finally cleared, revealing the guardian's true form hidden beneath the haze. It was a massive skeleton draped in armor that looked like it had been through a blender. Faint red lights flickered in its eye sockets, locking onto me like a heat-seeking missile. Seeing the monster shrink, the trash young master instantly switched back to his arrogant factory settings like a toxic middle manager. "Oomph, it's just a pile of bones. Watch me turn this thing into calcium powder." He drew his sword and charged forward with a sudden burst of unearned confidence. I tried to shout a warning, but my lungs felt like they were filled with wet cement. Myling narrowed her eyes, clearly sensing that the boss music hadn't actually stopped yet. Sure enough, his sword hit the bone and did about as much damage as a wet noodle. The skeleton guardian slowly raised its hand, moving with the terrifying jonkiness of a stop-motion horror movie. With one casual swipe, the young master was sent flying like a broken kite. "Help me! Someone save me!" he screamed, his voice cracking in pure terror. I let out a heavy sigh, realizing I'd officially been stuck with the world's worst party members. System warning. The Guardian has entered Phase 2, otherwise known as the "You're Screwed" mode. It looked like we weren't getting out of this dungeon without a massive repair bill for our souls. The skeleton's ribs began to glow with an ominous, toxic green light. It let out a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the entire chamber. I scrambled to my feet, my knees trembling from the sheer pressure. I yelled for Myling to save the idiot before he got crushed. She moved faster than a group of scalpers when a new GPU drops to save him. The Guardian swung its massive axe, missing my head by a literal hair's breadth. I could feel the cold wind of death brushing against my skin. System, skill, last stand activated. Warning, side effects include extreme fatigue and a sudden urge to cry. My vision blurred as mana surged through my veins like liquid fire. I gripped my sword, focusing every ounce of my will on the enemy. The skeleton lunged forward, its movements no longer janky but terrifyingly smooth. It was like the devs suddenly patched the boss mid-fight just to make my life a living hell. I parried the first blow, the impact vibrating through my arms with crushing force. I taunted the monster, hoping to keep its attention fixed on me. The monster didn't appreciate the trash talk and prepared a massive overhead strike. I dove to the side, rolling through the dust to escape the blow. The ground where I stood a second ago exploded into a million stone fragments. If that hit me, I'd be nothing more than a protagonist-flavored pancake on the dungeon menu. I spotted a glowing core deep within its ribcage, the classic weak point. I took a deep breath and prepared for one final, desperate dash. I lunged forward, my boots skidding against the cold, uneven stone floor. The skeleton swung its arm, trying to swat me away like I was a pop-up ad on a sketchy website. I ducked under the massive blow, feeling the rush of air graze the top of my head. My sword glowed with a faint blue light as I channeled every drop of my remaining mana. I aimed straight for that glowing core, praying my aim wasn't as bad as my luck. The monster let out a screech that sounded like a dial-up modem having a midlife crisis. I thrust my blade forward, pouring every bit of my desperate energy into the strike. The tip of my sword pierced the core, and for a split second, the entire world went silent. Then, a massive shockwave erupted, throwing me backward across the chamber. I hit the wall harder than a student's bank account balance after a Steam summer sale. The skeleton finally began to crumble, its ancient bones turning into piles of gray ash. System, boss defeated. Experience points awarded. You are now level 15. I lay there gasping for air, watching the loot drop from the sky like rain. Myling ran over to me, her face pale with worry and her eyes wide. She asked if I was okay, but I was too busy trying to keep my soul inside my body. The idiot I saved just stood there, contributing as much to the fight as a thoughts and prayers tweet. I managed to give him a weak middle finger before my vision started to fade. A golden chest appeared in the center of the room, shining like a beacon of hope. I knew I should get up and claim the prize, but my body felt like it was made of lead. Just as I was about to black out, the system pinged with a mysterious new notification. The system notification popped up right in front of my face, blocking my view of the loot. System, hidden quest, the coward's debt completed. Rewards are now being calculated. I glanced at the idiot I saved, who was still shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Myling helped me sit up, her hands trembling as she checked my various new leaking holes. "You're a reckless fool," she whispered, though she looked more relieved than actually angry. I ignored the lecture and focused on the golden chest sitting in the center of the room. I dragged my broken body toward it, leaving a trail of blood like a very pathetic slug. The chest lid creaked open, revealing a blinding light that probably cost the animators a fortune. Inside sat a single, ancient-looking jade pendant that pulsed with a strange, dark energy. System, you have obtained the Heavenly Devouring Pendant. Rank, unknown. Great, another item with heavenly in the name, because apparently, cool rock wasn't catchy enough. Suddenly, the idiot I saved finally found his voice and his misplaced sense of entitlement. He demanded I hand over the treasure because his family supposedly owns this territory. I looked at him, wondering if he had a death wish or if his brain was just buffering indefinitely. My sword was still in my hand, and my patience was thinner than a single ply of gas station toilet paper. Touch it and you lose the hand, I growled, sounding like I'd swallowed a bag of gravel. He backed away, tripping over a pile of bones in the most embarrassing way possible. Myling stood by my side, her aura flaring up to show she wasn't playing games either. The dungeon started to shake violently, signaling that the exit was about to close for good. I grabbed the pendant and told everyone it was time to get the hell out of here. We bolted for the exit while the ceiling started raining boulders like a bad game of Tetris. My legs were screaming, but the thought of being buried alive was a pretty good motivator. The entitled brat was lagging behind, probably because his ego was weighing him down. I reached back and grabbed him by the collar, dragging him along like a sack of potatoes. We dove through the portal just as the entire mountain decided to call it quits and collapse. I hit the dirt outside, gasping for air that didn't smell like ancient dust and monster farts. System, dungeon cleared. Reward, 5,000 EXP and a not dead yet participation trophy. I felt a surge of power as I leveled up, my wounds closing just enough to stop the leaking. Myling sat up and wiped the soot off her face, looking at me with actual, genuine respect. "I didn't think you had it in you," she admitted, which is the nicest thing she's ever said. Our moment of peace lasted about 3 seconds before a dozen guards surrounded us with spears. Great, the welcoming committee arrived, and they looked about as friendly as a hungry shark. A man in golden armor stepped forward, looking like he'd spent his life savings on hair gel. This was the city lord, the entitled brat's father, and the local champion of being a jerk. He looked at his crying son, then at the glowing pendant in my hand, and did the math. He demanded I hand over the treasure, claiming it was state property or some other bureaucratic nonsense. I stood my ground, even though my stamina bar was currently flashing redder than a fire engine. "I killed the boss. I keep the loot," I said, trying to sound cooler than I actually felt. The city lord's face turned a lovely shade of purple, like he was about to have an aneurysm. He raised his hand, signaling the guards to attack, because why talk when you can just murder? The guards lunged forward, their spears gleaming with a very clear, "you're screwed" energy. I took a deep breath, feeling the level-up mana buzzing under my skin like a caffeine rush. Myling drew her sword, standing back-to-back with me like we were posing for a volume cover. "If you want the pendant, you'll have to step over my dead body," I bluffed. The city lord laughed, a sound so grating and annoying I genuinely wanted to mute the game. He unleashed a wave of spiritual pressure that hit me harder than a Monday morning alarm. My knees buckled, but I refused to let this over-leveled NPC see me sweat. Just as he was about to strike, a loud whistle cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone froze, looking toward the forest edge where a mysterious new character had spawned. An old man appeared with a beard longer than a CVS receipt and robes from the bargain bin. "Enough of this nonsense," the old man said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 sequels. The city lord's face went pale, dropping his hand faster than a hot potato. The city lord looked terrified, realizing this old guy was basically the server admin. He walked toward us, his footsteps making absolutely zero sound on the dry leaves. He glanced at the pendant in my hand and gave a small, knowing nod. "The boy earned it fair and square," the old man declared, effectively ending the debate. The city lord gritted his teeth, clearly hating that his plot armor just got bypassed. The guards backed off, but the city lord's glare said, "I'll see you in the comments section." The old man turned to me, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and plot hooks. "Follow me, kid. You've got potential, and I've got a lot to teach you." I followed the old man, wondering what kind of training he actually had in store for me. Myling kept her hand on her sword, watching the old man with intense suspicion. I hiked deep into the mountains, passing through a dense and ancient-looking forest. I asked where the secret base was, looking around for any sign of a sect. The old man didn't say a word, maintaining a mysterious silence as he led the way. I finally stopped in front of a shack that looked like it was about to collapse. He welcomed me to the Hidden Cloud sect, gesturing to the literal pile of rotting wood. My expectations plummeted faster than a crypto coin after a celebrity tweet as I stared at the hut. I expected to see a hidden dragon, but the place was completely deserted and silent. The old man suddenly flicked my forehead, sending a jolt of energy through my body. My vision blurred for a second, reminding me that this senior was deceptively powerful. He pointed toward a waterfall that looked terrifyingly heavy and told me my first task was simple. The water was crashing down with enough force to flatten a man in seconds. He commanded me to sit under the falls and meditate until I felt the universe's rhythm. I looked at the freezing water and then at my robes, which were definitely not waterproof. The cold hit me harder than a "we need to talk" text at 2 a.m. as I stepped into the spray. This cultivation felt more like a high-stakes version of the Ice Bucket Challenge from 2014 without the charity. Myling just watched from the shore, looking relieved that she wasn't the one being tested. I sat on the rock, gritting my teeth as the weight of the water crushed me. I'm either going to have a dramatic character arc or a very expensive hospital bill after this. The old man sat on a rock sipping tea while I was basically getting waterboarded by nature. I tried to focus my internal energy, but the water kept breaking my concentration. My bones felt like they were being ground into powder by the sheer pressure. Suddenly, I felt a strange warmth beginning to glow in my lower abdomen. The old man yelled that I was finally starting to grasp the basics of the technique. I realized the water wasn't just hitting me, it was flowing through my meridians. I closed my eyes and let the energy circulate through my entire body. The pain started to fade, replaced by a sense of overwhelming power. I stood up in the middle of the waterfall, defying the crushing weight like a boss. The old man nodded in approval, though he still looked unimpressed, like an Asian parent seeing a B+. Myling's eyes widened as she saw the golden light radiating from my skin. I stepped out of the water, feeling lighter than I ever had in my past life. The old man told me that the first stage of the cloud-piercing art was complete. I looked at my hands, which were now glowing with a faint, ethereal mist. He handed me a rusty sword and told me to swing it 10,000 times. 10,000 swings. This training arc is starting to feel like a repetitive mobile game grind. Myling stepped forward, offering to spar with me to test my new strength. I took a fighting stance, feeling the energy surge through my limbs. She moved faster than a speedrunner on a world record pace, her blade stopping at my throat. I guess I still have a long way to go before I'm actually overpowered. Myling sheathed her sword with a smirk that basically said, "Nice try, kid." I sighed and started my first swing with that rusty piece of junk. One swing, two swings. My arms already felt like they were made of lead. By the 100th swing, the rust on the blade actually started to flake off. The old man sat there drinking tea, probably judging my form and my life choices. I focused on the cloud-piercing art energy, trying to sync it with my movements. Every time I swung, a faint trail of mist followed the blade's path. Myling watched from the sidelines, her expression shifting from amusement to genuine surprise. I hit the 5,000 mark, and my vision started to get all blurry and pixelated. My muscles were screaming, but the energy in my core was keeping me upright. Suddenly, the rusty sword let out a low hum, vibrating against my palm. I swung one more time, and a shockwave of air sliced a nearby tree in half. I stared at the fallen tree, wondering if I just unlocked a literal cheat code. The old man finally stood up, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the sword. He told me that the sword wasn't actually trash, but a sealed spirit weapon. Of course, because finding a legendary item in a dumpster is a total cultivation trope. He explained that my energy had partially broken the seal on the blade. Myling walked over and touched the blade, her fingers trembling slightly. She whispered that this weapon belonged to a legendary hero from centuries ago. I just wanted a nap, but apparently, I was now the owner of a haunted antique. The old man told me to keep practicing, claiming this was just the warm-up. I cursed him internally because it's always easy for the guy not doing the cardio. Myling's gaze shifted completely, and she finally stopped looking at me like a pile of expired milk. She asked how on earth I managed to pull off that insane shockwave move. I just shrugged and told her I got lucky with a random swing. Right on cue, a bunch of noisy commotion started echoing from outside the courtyard. A group of fancy-looking rich kids burst through the gate like they owned the place. The leader was so arrogant his nostrils were practically pointing at the North Star. This was my second brother, the family's golden boy and resident genius. He looked at my rusty sword and let out a loud, mocking laugh. He asked if a trash, like me, was busy playing in the mud again. I rolled my eyes, wondering if these villains ever attend a creative writing class for their insults. Myling tried to step in and defend me, but I held her back. I looked my brother dead in the eye and calmly asked what he wanted. He reminded me the family tournament was coming and told me not to embarrass him. Then he suddenly lunged forward, sending a blast of palm energy straight at my face. I instinctively raised my rusty sword to block the incoming strike. There was a loud bang, and I skidded back a few feet, but I was totally fine. My brother's face turned a lovely shade of purple, realizing his pro-gamer move just failed miserably. I just smirked and told him to put a little more muscle into it next time. He stared at his palm like it had just disconnected from the server mid-match. You actually blocked that? He stammered, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. I told him that his arrogance was the only thing bigger than his lack of talent. His lackeys stood there in stunned silence, unable to believe their genius leader just whiffed. He started charging up a glowing blue aura, because apparently, every mid-tier villain has a super scion complex. The air around him started to vibrate with a sudden, intense pressure that cracked the pavement. The old man in my head whispered that his technique was fundamentally flawed and easy to exploit. I didn't even use a skill, I just stepped to the left and let his momentum do the work. He flew past me and ate dirt so hard I'm surprised he didn't strike oil. Myling actually let out a tiny snort, clearly enjoying the sight of his total humiliation. My brother scrambled up, screaming that the upcoming tournament would be my literal funeral. I just waved him off, not even bothering to give his temper tantrum a second glance. He stomped away with his squad, leaving a trail of dust and hurt pride behind him. Myling walked over and asked where on earth I learned to move with such lethal precision. I told her it was a secret, keeping the whole ghost teacher thing strictly to myself. As they disappeared, I looked at my hands and felt a strange, new surge of confidence. But the tournament was only a week away, and the family's expectations were a heavy burden. The old man popped out and told me the real, bone-breaking training was about to begin. Somewhere in the shadows of the estate, a mysterious figure watched my every move with cold eyes. Stick around to see if I get expelled or executed, and smash that like button for more Trash Master content. Welcome back. Last time, I was just starting to realize that my new life is basically a hardcore survival game. The old man dragged me to the back hills before the sun even thought about waking up. My legs were shaking so hard, I looked like a glitching NPC in a Bethesda game. He told me to carry a massive boulder up the mountain, which is apparently Cultivation 101. Every muscle in my body was screaming for a union break that definitely wasn't coming. The ghost teacher just laughed, saying my physical foundation was as flimsy as wet cardboard. If this is what it takes to be a protagonist, I'd rather go back to filing taxes for a living. I spent the next 3 days basically drowning in my own sweat and pure, unadulterated regret. Myling showed up with some medicinal soup that smelled like a wet dog's gym locker. She looked worried, but I just gave her a thumbs up while literally coughing up along. Surprisingly, the soup actually worked, and I felt a warm current flowing through my tired veins. He called the next move heaven-shattering palm, because slapping people really hard wasn't edgy enough for the marketing team. I practiced the strike until my hands were raw and my brain was completely fried. By the 5th day, I could actually crack a stone pillar without breaking my own arm. Rumors started spreading through the estate that the Trash Master had finally lost his mind. My father, the clan head, sent a messenger to remind me not to embarrass the family name. I just stared at the messenger until he got uncomfortable and scurried away like a frightened rabbit. I'm starting to realize that being the villain is way more fun than my old 9 to 5 soul-crushing office job. I could still feel those cold eyes watching me from the shadows, but I had a tournament to win. Smash that like button if you want to see me turn this tournament into a total disaster. The day of the family tournament finally arrived, and the vibe was more toxic than a League of Legends lobby. I walked into the arena, feeling everyone's judgmental stares digging into my back like literal knives. My cousin, Lin Foam, was already there, looking like the poster child for arrogant young masters everywhere. He gave me a look of pure contempt, clearly expecting me to fail in front of the entire clan. I just yawned, wondering if the prize money was enough to finally buy a bed that didn't feel like stone. The referee announced the first round, and I was up against a massive guy they called Iron Bull. Iron Bull charged at me like a freight train with 0 brakes and fewer brain cells than a bag of hammers. I sidestepped his attack with ease, watching him stumble past me like a clumsy drunk. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he spun around looking more confused than a boomer trying to open a PDF. With a single heaven-shattering palm, I sent him flying straight out of the ring. The crowd went silent, probably trying to process how the Trash Master just one-shot a human tank. Lin Feng's face turned a deep shade of purple as he watched his expectations fall apart in real time. My father sat in the high chairs, his face pale as he struggled to process my sudden power-up. The next few matches were a blur of flashy techniques and desperate shouting from the other contestants. Finally, it was time for the semifinals, and I was paired against the family's top female prodigy. She pulled out a whip that glowed with blue energy, because of course she had a flashy weapon. "Surrender now," she said, "and I'll make sure your hospital bill isn't too high for the family to pay." I just smirked and told her to stop talking and start fighting before I fell asleep from boredom. She lashed out, her whip moving faster than a toxic comment section when someone shares a wrong opinion. I caught the whip with my bare hand, and the look on her face was worth every second of training. She tried to pull the whip back, but I held on like a debt collector who just found your new address. I gave the glowing whip a sharp tug, sending her stumbling toward me with absolutely zero grace. I leaned in and whispered, "Is this really the best the family's prodigy can do?" With a gentle push, she tumbled out of the ring, looking more shocked than a cat in a bathtub. The referee just stared at me, his mouth hanging open in a state of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Winner, Lin Fan," he finally shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure of the awkward silence. I walked off the stage, ignoring the whispers that were spreading through the crowd like a wildfire. Now, only one person stood between me and the championship, my dear, arrogant cousin, Lin Feng. He stepped onto the stage, his aura flaring up with intense, golden energy that blinded the front row. "You've had your fun, trash," he hissed, "but your little lucky streak ends right here, right now." I just rolled my eyes, wondering if these villains ever attended a how to not be cliché seminar. The match started, and he moved with speed that would have been impressive to anyone else. He threw a punch aimed right at my face, screaming something about his superior bloodline and destiny. I blocked it with my forearm, the impact vibrating through the air like a massive thunderclap. He looked stunned that his ultimate tiger strike didn't immediately turn me into a red smear. "My turn," I said, feeling the energy in my core start to hum with a dangerous power. I launched a counterattack, my fist moving so fast it practically broke the animation budget. He barely managed to block, but the force sent him skidding back across the stone arena floor. His expensive robes were torn, and his hair was a mess, finally revealing the panic in his eyes. He let out a primal scream, preparing his final move as the crowd held their collective breath. He gathered every last drop of his chi, his body glowing with a blinding, desperate light. "Heavenly Sun Decimation," he roared, pouring his entire soul into one final, massive attack. A sphere of golden fire formed above him, radiating heat that made the very air sizzle. I just stood there, wondering if I had time to order a pizza before he actually finished charging. With a scream of pure rage, he hurled the massive fireball directly at my chest. The ground beneath his feet cracked and melted as the projectile tore through the arena. I channeled my inner energy, feeling the cold, dark power of my core surge to my hand. Instead of dodging, I reached out and caught the fireball like I was snagging a foul ball at a stadium. The golden flames roared against my palm, but they couldn't break through my defensive layer. With a cold smile, I tightened my grip and crushed the entire attack into nothingness. The resulting shockwave sent Lin Feng flying backward, his body tumbling across the stone floor. He slammed into the reinforced arena wall, leaving a crater that looked painful just to see. A heavy silence fell over the crowd as they realized their golden boy had just been humbled. He lay there in a heap, his pride shattered into more pieces than a dropped iPhone screen. I looked up at the VIP section, staring directly into the eyes of the stunned family elders. The referee stood frozen for a long moment before finally raising his hand in my direction. "The winner and the new champion of the tournament is Lin Fan," he shouted. I didn't wait for the applause. I simply turned my back on the fallen prodigy and walked away. My system notification chimed in my head, giving me a dopamine hit that felt better than the actual victory. As I stepped off the stage, I felt a murderous gaze from the shadows, knowing the real game had just begun. I walked into the room like I owned the place, which, let's be honest, I basically do. And of course, there he was, the local young master looking like a budget anime villain. He was sitting there sipping tea while his goons tried their best to look intimidating. "You finally showed up," he sneered, as if he hadn't been waiting for 3 hours. I honestly wanted to tell him his hair looked like a wet poodle, but I played it cool. My system notification popped up, telling me his power level was basically trash tier. I could practically feel the audience cringing at his cliché dialogue from a mile away. He stood up, knocking his chair over because apparently, basic motor skills are hard. "Hand over the treasure, and I might let you crawl out of here," he barked. I almost laughed. Bro really thinks he's the main character of this story. I took a step forward, and the air pressure in the room started to get heavy. His goons took a step back, realizing their health insurance definitely didn't cover this. "You're talking a lot of trash for someone within slapping distance," I replied calmly. The look on his face was priceless, pure, unadulterated, "I messed up" energy. He signaled his bodyguards to attack, because villains never fight their own battles first. I sighed, wondering why every minor antagonist follows the exact same boring script. The first guy lunged at me with a fist that moved slower than dial-up internet. I didn't even need a skill, I just sidestepped like I was dodging a bill collector. One quick tap to his neck, and he was down for the count before he hit the floor. "Next?" I asked, looking at the young master who was already starting to sweat buckets. The rest of the goons looked at each other, clearly reconsidering their career choices. I could see the gears turning in their heads. Was this paycheck really worth a broken jaw? The young master slammed his fist on the table, his face turning a lovely shade of tomato. "Useless, all of you," he screamed, sounding like a toddler who just lost his favorite toy. He pulled out a jade pendant, and suddenly the room started glowing with a tacky green light. "You forced my hand. This is a grade 3 spirit artifact," he yelled with way too much confidence. I just stood there, waiting for the special effects to finish so we could get this over with. A spectral tiger emerged from the pendant, roaring loud enough to wake the neighbors. My system popped up a notification saying, "Trash detected," which honestly felt a bit personal. The tiger lunged, but its movement was so predictable I could have dodged it in my sleep. I infused my fist with a bit of chi and punched the spectral cat right in its glowing nose. The artifact shattered into a million pieces, and the young master's jaw followed suit. He fell back into his chair, looking like he'd just seen a ghost, which, technically, he had. My family's treasure. He whimpered, as if I'd just deleted his 500-hour Minecraft save. I walked over and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him up like a sack of potatoes. Is that all you've got? Because I've seen more fight in a wet paper bag. He started shaking, and I'm pretty sure the smell in the room changed for the worse. Wait, my father is the city lord. If you touch me, you're a dead man. Ah, there it is. My dad is the CEO defense, the ultimate move of every loser villain. I gave him a grin that probably looked way more terrifying than I intended. Oh, the city lord? I'm absolutely trembling. Can't you see my knees knocking? He stared at me with the wide-eyed terror of a man who just realized he's not the protagonist. The crowd started whispering, already picking out which coffin would fit me best. My system pinged a notification, probably wondering why I was still playing around in the tutorial zone. I tossed the young master toward his goons like he was a bag of expired groceries. Go run to your daddy, I called out, and tell him to bring someone worth my time. He scrambled away on all fours, his dignity trailing behind him like a sad, broken tail. The onlookers cleared a path faster than the Red Sea, or my friends when it's time to pay the bill. I sat back down and reached for my chopsticks, because justice is great, but noodles are better. Naturally, the universe decided I wasn't allowed to have a peaceful lunch today. A sudden, heavy pressure slammed into the room, making the tea in my cup vibrate. Someone powerful was approaching, and they were clearly trying way too hard with the dramatic aura effects. A man in gleaming silver armor landed in the middle of the street, unnecessarily cracking the stone. Who was the fool that dared to strike the city lord's son? He roared. I looked down at my half-eaten bowl and let out a long, weary sigh. The new guy stood there with his chest puffed out, looking like a very angry peacock. His cultivation base was actually impressive, but his haircut was a legitimate tragedy that needed immediate intervention. I slowly stood up, dusting off my robes while he tried to burn a hole in me with his eyes. That would be me, I said, and you're currently interrupting my favorite part of the meal. He drew a massive broadsword, and the temperature in the street dropped by 20 degrees. He swung that oversized butter knife at me with enough force to level a small building. I leaned back just an inch, letting the cold steel whistle past my nose. The table behind me didn't fare so well, splitting perfectly down the middle. My bowl of noodles hit the floor, and honestly, seeing that broth spill hurt more than any physical wound. Okay, now it's personal. Nobody messes with a man's lunch and lives to tell the tale. I lashed out with a single finger, flicking the side of his massive blade. The metal hummed with a high-pitched ring that probably shattered every window in a 3-block radius. He stared at his trembling hands like he'd just seen a ghost, or realized he forgot to turn the stove off. I didn't give him time to process his life choices before I stepped into his personal space. I grabbed the front of his expensive silver chest plate, pulling him close enough to smell his fear. He panicked and tried to launch a kick at my ribs, which was cute, really. I caught his boot midair and gave it a little twist just for the aesthetic. He hit the pavement with a crunch that sounded like a bag of chips being crushed by a semi-truck. Suddenly, the street was crawling with city lord guards, appearing out of nowhere like bad spawns. There were at least 20 of them, all wearing the same, I'm about to get my butt kicked expression. Seriously, do these guys all go to the same generic henchman academy, or what? I cracked my knuckles, feeling that familiar itch for a bit of high-octane violence. My system chimed in my head, finally waking up to offer me a new quest. The objective was simple, beat everyone up without breaking a sweat or ruining my hair. Time to find out if these guys provide enough XP to be worth the effort. The captain of the guards stepped forward, looking like he spent way too much on his character skin. He started giving a speech about justice and law, but I was already checking my phone for a better plot. I yawned so wide I almost swallowed the fly that was buzzing around his massive ego. Are we doing this, or are you going to talk me to death? I asked politely. He didn't appreciate the feedback and ordered his goons to charge all at once. I sidestepped the first spear, which was moving slower than a Windows 95 update on dial-up. I grabbed the shaft and used it to pole vault over the front line like an Olympic pro. I landed right in the middle of them, because why take them one by one when I can AoE? I spun around, my leg connecting with 3 helmets in a satisfying rhythmic thud. One guy tried to sneak up behind me, clearly forgetting that I have eyes in the back of my head. I didn't even look back. I just sent a backward elbow straight into his solar plexus. He folded faster than a cheap lawn chair in a hurricane, and honestly, the sound was music to my ears. The system counter started ticking up, 5 down, 15 more to go for that sweet, sweet loot. The captain was sweating now, his tough guy facade crumbling like a stale cookie. He drew a glowing sword, probably some rare drop he bought with his daddy's money. He swung it with a roar, but his form was so bad it actually hurt my eyes to watch. I caught the blade between 2 fingers, making me look like a total Mary Sue, but I don't make the rules. Is this the best the city lord can afford? I mocked, feeling the cringe in his soul. I flicked the sword, and it shattered into a million pieces like my hopes for a peaceful lunch. I stood there, surrounded by groaning guards, without a single hair out of place. The captain stared at his broken hilt, his face turning a shade of purple I didn't know existed. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own cape like a clumsy extra in a low-budget play. I've seen this retreating villain trope so many times it's starting to feel like a glitch in the Matrix. You dare destroy a gift from the city lord? He stammered, clutching the air. I just shrugged, because honestly, the city lord's taste in weaponry was absolute garbage. The surrounding crowd gasped, probably wondering if I had a death wish or just really good insurance. Call your boss, I said, leaning against a nearby pillar like I owned the place. He pulled out a glowing red pill, probably the same forbidden medicine every C-tier villain keeps in their pocket. He swallowed it whole, and suddenly his muscles started bulging in all the wrong places. His eyes turned bloodshot, and he let out a roar that sounded more like a dying lawnmower. My system pinged, warning me that his power level was rising, but I wasn't exactly shaking. He lunged at me with a speed that would have been impressive if I weren't already playing on 144 Hz. I tilted my head to the left, letting his fist whistle past my ear with inches to spare. The shockwave from his punch cracked the stone wall behind me, which seemed a bit dramatic. Is that all the forbidden stuff gets you? I asked, feeling genuinely disappointed by the power-up. I grabbed his wrist, feeling the heat radiating off his skin like a cheap space heater. With a simple twist, I sent him spinning toward the entrance of the main hall. He crashed through the heavy oak doors, clearing a path for my grand entrance. The city lord stepped out looking like a budget version of a final boss you'd find in a mobile game ad. He looked down at his defeated captain and then at me, his eyes narrowing with pure annoyance. "Who are you to cause such a ruckus in my city?" he demanded, sounding like he'd practiced that line in a mirror. I dusted off my sleeves, looking him dead in the eye with all the respect of a cat looking at a cucumber. He released his spiritual pressure, and honestly, it felt like being stuck in an elevator with someone who just ate a bean burrito. The floor beneath him cracked, because apparently, every high-level cultivator has a personal vendetta against tile flooring. My system didn't even bother giving me a warning. It just displayed a yawn emoji in my peripheral vision. "I'm just a guy passing through," I said, "but your captain here really needs a lesson in hospitality." The city lord's face twisted into a mask of rage that would have been scary if he didn't have a piece of spinach in his teeth. He lunged at me with a glowing palm, looking like a discount Iron Man trying to find his charging cable. I caught his wrist midair, the impact sending a shockwave through the hall that definitely voided the building's insurance. "Is this the power of a city lord?" I asked, leaning in close enough to smell his expensive, yet tacky, cologne. He tried to pull away, but my grip was tighter than a toddler clutching a stolen candy bar. His guards finally snapped out of their trance and drew their swords, looking like they really didn't want to be there. I didn't even look at them. I just flicked my wrist and sent a wave of energy that knocked them all flat. He started glowing gold, which is basically the universal sign for, I'm about to lose, but I want to look shiny while doing it. "You're using the heaven-breaking palm, right?" I noted, spotting the massive flaw in his stance immediately. "Too bad your heaven is about as sturdy as a wet paper towel," I added, because I can't resist a good roast. He let out a primal scream, his golden energy flaring up like he was trying to go Super Saiyan on a budget. I activated my Counter-Strike skill, and the world around us seemed to slow down into a laggy mess. The explosion sent him flying back so fast, he almost broke the sound barrier and my immersion at the same time. He hit the throne with a sickening thud, and for a second, the whole room went as quiet as a graveyard. The city lord lay in the rubble, looking like a confused NPC whose AI just glitched out. This is impossible. "Who the hell are you?" he stammered, clutching his bruised ego. I dusted off my hands and started walking toward him, savoring the sound of my own footsteps. More guards swarmed the room, but they stayed back like they were watching a live-action horror movie. My system chimed in my head, delivering a sweet hit of XP that felt better than caffeine. "Who I am doesn't matter," I said, "but your debt to me is currently accruing interest." He tried to stand up, but my spiritual pressure pinned him down like a bug under a boot. Suddenly, a high-pitched shout echoed from the back of the mansion, breaking the dramatic tension. A girl in red came flying out, her sword aimed at my throat like she was auditioning for a wuxia film. "Stop! Don't you dare lay a finger on my father!" she screamed, full of righteous fury. I sidestepped the blade with zero effort, taking a moment to judge this new challenger's stats. She was definitely a 10 in the looks department, but her tactical IQ was sitting at a solid 0. When her first strike missed, she pivoted into a falling leaf sword style that was honestly quite pretty. To my eyes, her ultimate move was moving slower than a government website on a Monday morning. I caught the glowing blade between two fingers and gave it a casual little flick. The sword snapped with a satisfying clink, proving that expensive gear can't save a mid-tier player. She stood there frozen, staring at her broken weapon as if her entire world had just uninstalled itself. You broke my autumn water sword. Do you have any idea how much that cost?" I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my own brain. "Is this a cultivation epic or a bad soap opera?" "Linger, get back," the city lord croaked. "You're not his match. You're just walking XP. I let out a cold sneer, looking at the father-daughter duo like they were a tragic soap opera finale. "Since you two are so close, maybe I should just send you both to the afterlife together." The city lord's face turned pale as he screamed for mercy, offering compensation to save his skin. I stopped in my tracks and raised an eyebrow, wondering just how much his life was worth. He reached into his robes with trembling hands and pulled out a shiny golden token. "This is the key to the city's secret vault, filled with more loot than a premium battle pass." I snatched the token away, and my system immediately popped up a scanning window. Ding. Hidden vault detected. Time to go full loot goblin mode. Host. At least the old man was smart enough not to gamble his life against my dwindling patience. Just as I was about to leave, the sound of urgent footsteps echoed from outside the room. A group of black-clad assassins crashed through the windows, aiming straight for the city lord's throat. I stood there speechless. Could this plot twist be any more cliché if it tried? Kill them all. Leave no witnesses. The leader barked, sounding like every generic villain ever. It looked like someone was trying to steal my loot before I even had a chance to claim it. I gave a casual wave of my hand, sending the lead assassin flying back through the wall. The rest of the squad froze, realizing there was a max-level player standing in their way. Who are you? Do you have any idea who the Shadow Pavilion is? The leader hissed. I let out a massive yawn, because listening to these guys is more effective than a sleeping pill. Who I am isn't important, but your timing for this ambush is absolutely terrible. I tightened my grip, ready to give these uninvited guests a very painful reality check. I lunged forward, moving faster than a speedrunner trying to skip a boring tutorial cutscene. My fist connected with the leader's chest, sending him flying like a ragdoll in a Bethesda game with a broken physics engine. The other assassins stood there, probably wondering why their stealth build wasn't working against a literal god. I asked, dusting off my sleeves while they trembled in their boots like they'd seen their own funeral. One brave soul tried to sneak up behind me, but my spatial awareness was basically a built-in wall hack. I spun around and delivered a kick that sent him straight into the ceiling like a human chandelier. Ding. Experience points gained. You're farming these guys like common mobs in a low-level dungeon. Host. The city lord watched from the corner, looking like he'd just seen a ghost or a god. Please, great immortal, just take the vault and leave us in peace, he blubbered. I ignored his pathetic whimpering and walked toward the direction the golden token was pointing. The secret entrance was hidden behind a massive painting of some ancestor who looked like he'd just smelled a very bad fart. I pressed the token into the slot, and the wall groaned like it was waking up from a 1,000-year nap. As the door slid open, a golden glow hit me harder than a flashbang in a dark room. Inside were piles of spirit stones, rare herbs, and weapons that looked expensive enough to buy a small country. My system started pinging like crazy, identifying every single piece of loot in the room. Warning, high-level energy signature detected at the back of the vault. I walked past the gold, my eyes fixed on a dusty box sitting on a pedestal. It looked suspiciously like a quest item that triggers a boss fight I definitely didn't sign up for today. I reached out and touched the lid, feeling a surge of power that made my hair stand on end. Before I could open it, a voice boomed from the shadows. Who dares disturb my eternal slumber? I nearly jumped out of my skin, looking around for the source of that generic, bass-boosted voice. A ghostly figure shimmered into existence right above the pedestal, looking extremely grumpy about his nap. It was a wizened old man with a beard so long he probably used it as a blanket to save on the heating bill. Oh, look, another ancient soul living in a box, I muttered, rolling my eyes at the lack of originality. The old man glared at me, his eyes glowing with a faint, flickering blue light. Ignorant brat, you stand before the great sage of the 9 heavens, he roared. Ding, new boss detected, a senile ghost who clearly forgot to take his meds before dying. He raised a translucent hand, and the air in the vault started to get colder than my ex's heart. A blast of icy energy shot toward me, freezing the gold coins on the floor instantly. I sidestepped the attack with the grace of a cat that just realized the floor is lava. Seriously, eternal slumber? I asked. Bro, you were sleeping in a dusty basement, not a 5-star resort. The ghost sputtered, clearly not used to being roasted by a kid who should be trembling in fear. I channeled my chi into my palm, letting the golden light of my cultivation flare up. The entire vault illuminated, making the ghost look like he was about to get deleted from the server. That power. How can a mere mortal possess such a divine aura? He stammered. I gave him my best main character smirk, knowing full well my plot armor was thicker than a dictionary. With a flick of my wrist, I sent a wave of energy that sent the old man reeling back into his box. The lid finally creaked open, revealing a single, glowing jade slip resting on a velvet cushion. I picked it up, and a flood of information rushed into my brain like a high-speed fiber optic download. Just as I was about to celebrate, the entire vault started shaking like it was about to self-destruct. The walls started cracking, and dust rained down like it was trying to bury me alive. I tucked the jade slip into my robe, not about to let my hard-earned loot get crushed. Of course there's a self-destruct sequence, I yelled. Does every dungeon come with a Michael Bay setting by default? I sprinted toward the exit, my boots skidding on the shifting floor tiles. A massive stone pillar toppled right in front of me, blocking the main path. I didn't even slow down, leaping over the debris like an Olympic hurdler. The exit was closing fast, the heavy stone door sliding down with a finality I didn't appreciate. I slid underneath the gap at the last second, barely keeping my nose from getting flattened. I tumbled out into the fresh air, coughing as a cloud of ancient dust followed me out. Behind me, the entrance collapsed entirely, sealing the great sage and his dusty basement forever. I stood up and brushed off my clothes, looking back at the pile of rocks. Ding. Quest complete. You survived a cliché tomb collapse without becoming a pancake. Reward, 500 XP and a pat on the back. Only 500, I complained. I've seen better rewards in the daily login bonus of a trashy gacha game. I checked the jade slip again, feeling the power thrumming inside the cool stone. It was a technique called heaven-shattering palm, which sounded way cooler than it probably was. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching from the forest path, and they didn't sound friendly. A group of disciples in matching white robes emerged, looking like they were late for a cult meeting. Their leader pointed a sword at me with the unearned confidence of a level 1 tutorial boss who hasn't seen the player's stats. "Hand over the treasure, kid, and maybe we'll let you leave with your dignity," he sneered. I looked at his stats and couldn't help but laugh at his sheer, suicidal audacity. The leader's face turned a lovely shade of eggplant, clearly not used to being the butt of the joke. "You dare mock the Cloudstep sect?" he shrieked, as if that name carried any weight outside his village. I checked his stats again, level 15. I've seen more intimidating NPCs in a mobile game tutorial. Honestly, picking a fight with me right now is like trying to play Dark Souls with a Guitar Hero controller. It's just sad. I didn't even draw my sword. I just stood there with my hands in my pockets, looking bored. "Kill him," he roared, and his 4 lackeys charged at me with all the coordination of drunken toddlers. I sidestepped the first attacker, letting him stumble past me and faceplant directly into a tree. The second guy swung his sword so slowly I had time to check my imaginary watch and sigh. I caught his wrist and gave it a gentle twist, listening to the satisfying pop of his ego breaking. He dropped his weapon and clutched his arm, wailing like I'd just deleted his favorite Minecraft save. The other 2 stopped in their tracks, suddenly realizing they weren't the main characters of this story. I gave them a come-at-me gesture, but they were too busy reconsidering their life choices. The leader stepped forward, his sword trembling as he tried to summon some kind of fire technique. His blazing strike looked about as threatening as a scented candle in a light breeze. I've seen scarier birthday cakes. I blew on the tiny flame on his sword, and it actually went out, leaving him staring in disbelief. I delivered a swift kick to his chest, sending him flying back into a very prickly bush. "Ding, you've defeated arrogant mob and his goons. Reward, 200 XP and a sense of superiority." I walked over to the leader, who was now groaning and trying to remember his own name. I started rummaging through their pouches, because in an RPG world, theft is just called efficient resource management. I grabbed a map and a handful of spirit stones before heading deeper into the forest. The forest grew darker as I walked, the trees seeming to close in around me from all sides. The air grew thick with a heavy mist that smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. A sudden rustle in the thick bushes to my left made me stop in my tracks immediately. Out stepped a creature that looked like a terrifying cross between a grizzly bear and a nightmare. I checked its stats, level 22 Ironback Bear. Now we're finally getting somewhere interesting. It let out a thunderous roar that echoed through the entire forest, vibrating deep in my chest. I yawned, wondering if these monsters ever get tired of the same old dramatic entrance that every low-budget villain uses. The bear charged forward, its massive paws cracking the earth with every heavy, thundering step. I didn't move until the very last second, enjoying the adrenaline rush of a perfectly timed dodge. With a flick of my wrist, I drew my blade, the cold steel humming with anticipation. I sliced upward, aiming for the soft spot under its chin that the system conveniently highlighted. The bear let out a pained whimper and swiped blindly at the air where I used to be. I landed behind it, posing like a protagonist in a high-budget anime opening while the background music kicks in. One more strike was all it took to send the oversized rug crashing down to the ground. "Ding, you've defeated the Ironback Bear. Reward, 1000 XP and a bear gallbladder." I placed the loot into my inventory and turned to continue my journey through the woods. Suddenly, the system pinged again, but this time the notification was a bright, flashing red. "Warning, a high-level entity is approaching your current location at an extremely high speed." I looked up to see a guy flying on a sword, looking like he was desperately rushing to a Black Friday sale. He landed with enough force to create a massive crater, clearly having never heard of a little thing called environmental conservation. He stood up and dusted off his robes, ignoring the massive crater he'd just created. "You there, peasant," he shouted, pointing a finger at me with absolute arrogance. I looked around to see if he was talking to someone else, but it was just me and the bear. He asked if I'd seen a spirit herb nearby, his voice dripping with unearned superiority. I stared at his fancy silk robes, which probably cost more than my entire life savings back in my previous world. I checked his stats and saw he was a level 35 young master from the Azure Cloud sect. He looked down at me like I was something he'd stepped in on his way to the sect. "I'm busy," I said, turning my back on him without a second thought. The air behind me turned ice cold as he drew his sword, the steel ringing with a sharp sound. He screamed about how a lowly commoner like me dared to ignore a highborn cultivator like him. The classic "do you know who my father is?" line, the universal catchphrase of every NPC destined to get slapped. I sighed, wondering why every cultivator I met had to be so incredibly annoying. He swung his sword, sending a wave of blue energy toward me that sliced through the air. I sidestepped it effortlessly, watching the energy blast delete a tree behind me. I told him to watch where he was aiming before he ruined the entire forest. He lunged again, his movements so predictable I could have finished a three-course meal before he actually reached me. I caught his blade between two fingers, a move I'd practiced in my head for maximum coolness. His eyes widened to the size of dinner plates as he realized his attack had been stopped. The system chimed in, probably laughing at him too, as it calculated my disrespect points for this encounter. "My turn," I whispered, flashing a grin that meant his bad day was just getting started. I flicked his blade with one finger, sending a vibration that nearly rattled his teeth out. He stumbled back, his face turning a lovely shade of, "I definitely picked the wrong fight." I didn't give him a second to recover before I closed the gap with a single step. His eyes were bulging so hard, I thought they'd pop out like a pair of overstressed stress balls. He tried to summon a shield, but his energy was already depleted from that last attack. "Is this the best the Azure Cloud sect has?" I asked, barely hiding a yawn. I delivered a casual backhand slap that sent him spinning across the clearing. He flew through the air with the grace of a wet sack of potatoes being launched from a catapult. He crashed into a boulder, leaving a human-sized dent that definitely wasn't there before. The system dinged, rewarding me with enough experience points to make this annoyance worth it. He coughed up blood and sputtered that his father would personally see me executed. My dad is the CEO energy was so strong I half expected him to pull out a LinkedIn profile. I walked over and looked down at him, my shadow covering his pathetic, trembling form. I told him that if he wanted to keep his limbs, he'd better start emptying his pockets. With shaking hands, he pulled off his spatial ring and tossed it toward me. I caught the ring midair and scanned the contents, hoping for something better than trash. Most of this loot was so useless it looked like he'd been shopping at a medieval Dollar Tree. I gave him a light kick to the ribs just to make sure he stayed down. I turned my back on him, leaving the young master to rethink his life in the dirt. It was finally time to find that spirit herb before another idiot fell out of the sky. I pushed through the thick underbrush, following the system's GPS toward that spirit herb. My internal map was flashing like a neon sign in a sketchy part of town. Suddenly, a shadow wolf lunged at me, looking like a CGI reject from a low-budget horror movie. I sidestepped the beast with the casual grace of someone dodging a flyer on the street. It missed me entirely and slammed face-first into a tree with a very satisfying crunch. "Nice hustle, Sparky, but your hitboxes are absolutely trash," I muttered. The wolf growled, its eyes glowing with that classic, "I'm about to go phase 2 red light." I didn't have time for a mini-boss fight, so I flicked a single pebble at its skull. The pebble hit with the force of a freight train, sending the wolf straight to the afterlife. My system dinged again, and I swear these notifications have more pop-ups than a sketchy movie streaming site. Finally, I spotted the heavenly frost leaf glowing at the very edge of a steep cliff. This thing was so rare it could probably pay off my student loans and buy a private island. But of course, just as I reached for it, a loud whistle echoed through the entire canyon. 3 more disciples from the Azure Cloud sect landed in front of me, looking incredibly offended. Their leader had a beard so long he looked like Gandalf if he'd spent his life complaining to managers. He demanded I hand over the herb and repent for what I did to their junior brother. I looked at the herb, then at the 3 clowns, and let out a truly exhausted sigh. "Is there a factory somewhere that just pumps out these generic arrogant extras?" I asked. They drew their swords in such perfect unison I half expected them to start a choreographed K-pop dance. I cracked my knuckles, ready to show these guys why you never get between a gamer and his loot. The leader pointed his sword at me, his hand shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "You dare defy the Azure Cloud sect?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the canyon. I just rolled my eyes and took a step forward, letting my aura flare up. The 2 lackeys charged first, looking like those generic NPCs who only have one attack animation. I ducked under the first swing, feeling the wind whistle over my head like a missed high five. With a quick palm strike, I sent the first guy flying into a nearby boulder. The impact was loud enough to wake the dead, or at least give them a headache. The second one tried a fancy spin move that was more flash than actual substance. I caught his wrist and gave it a gentle twist, listening to his joints pop. He screamed and dropped his sword, clutching his arm like he just lost a high-stakes game of Fortnite. Now it was just me and Gandalf the Grumpy, who was looking significantly less confident. He started chanting a spell, his beard fluttering in a magical wind that came out of nowhere. A massive ball of blue energy formed at the tip of his blade, glowing intensely. "Taste the Azure Cloud Strike," he yelled, launching the projectile straight at my face. I didn't even bother dodging. I just swiped my hand to the side, parrying the energy. The blast hit a tree behind me, vaporizing it instantly in a cloud of splinters. His jaw dropped so low I was honestly worried he'd trip over it along with his ridiculous beard. I closed the distance in a blur, appearing right in front of his trembling nose. I whispered, "Your free trial of living has expired, buddy," and tapped him lightly on the forehead. He collapsed into a heap, finally leaving me alone with my precious, shiny loot. I knelt down and started rummaging through their pockets like a desperate player after a boss fight. Most of it was just low-grade spirit stones and some lint that definitely wasn't magical. Then I found a glowing jade pendant tucked away in the leader's inner robe. My system interface popped up, flashing brighter than a neon sign in a dark alley. The notification sound was so loud I thought my brain was being microwaved by a 5G tower. A mechanical voice droned in my head, announcing that I had detected a hidden treasure map. I unfolded the map, which looked like it had been drawn by a toddler with a crayon. It pointed toward a forbidden zone that everyone in this world usually avoids like the plague. Naturally, as the protagonist, I have to walk straight into the place where common sense goes to die. I stood up, dusted off my robes, and prepared to head toward the misty forest. Suddenly, the ground beneath me started to vibrate with a low, ominous hum. A massive shadow stretched across the canyon floor, blocking out the afternoon sun. I looked up and saw a giant spirit eagle circling above, looking very hungry. This bird was so big it could probably carry off a small house, or my dignity. It screeched, a sound that pierced through my ears like a feedback loop at a rock concert. I gripped my sword, wondering if I could cook this thing into some high-tier fried chicken. The eagle dived, its talons gleaming like polished silver daggers in the light. I rolled to the left, barely avoiding a set of claws that would have turned me into ribbons. My stamina bar took a hit, but my annoyed at being interrupted meter was officially maxed out. I looked at the beast and prepared to show it why they call me the Trash Master. I swung my blade, aiming straight for the bird's oversized drumsticks. The eagle flapped its wings, creating a gust of wind that smelled like wet feathers. I was nearly blown off the cliff, which would have been a real game over screen for my dignity. I jammed my sword into the ground to anchor myself against the gale. The system chimed in, suggesting I use a wind-breaking pill I bought earlier. I swallowed the pill, and suddenly I felt as heavy as a lead weight. The eagle screeched again, wondering why its prey suddenly gained 500 pounds. It lunged at me with its beak, looking like a giant, angry pair of tweezers. I sidestepped the attack and delivered a solid kick to its stupid bird face. My foot connected with a thud that sounded like a watermelon hitting a sidewalk. The bird stumbled back, its eyes spinning like a loading icon on a dial-up connection. Now was my chance to use that Trash Master's special move I'd been practicing. I channeled my energy into the blade, making it glow with a questionable brownish aura. I yelled my attack name, because apparently, silence doesn't sell enough manga volumes. The strike hit home, sending a shockwave through the eagle's massive body. Feathers exploded everywhere, making it look like a pillow fight gone horribly wrong. The beast let out one final, pathetic squawk before collapsing onto the canyon floor. I stood over the carcass, waiting for the loot drops like a kid on Christmas. The system rewarded me with spirit eagle meat and a feather of mediocrity. I almost died for a feather of mediocrity. Even the game devs are roasting me now. I stared at the feather of mediocrity in my hand, feeling my soul leave my body. Seriously, I fought a giant bird for this. My luck is worse than a gacha player on a losing streak. I tossed the feather into my inventory, where it could hang out with all my other useless junk. Suddenly, the ground beneath the eagle's carcass began to rumble like a hungry stomach. A hidden stone door creaked open, revealing a dark, ominous staircase leading downward. Of course there's a secret dungeon, because heaven forbid I actually go home and take a nap. I lit a torch, which flickered with the same confidence I have in my life choices. As I descended, the air got colder and smelled like a basement that hadn't been aired out since the 90s. The walls were covered in ancient carvings that looked like a toddler had a stroke with a chisel. I reached the bottom and found myself in a room filled with gold, or so I thought. It was actually just yellow-painted rocks, the ultimate gotcha from the dungeon designer. In the center of the room sat a single, glowing chest that looked suspiciously like a trap. My Trash Master intuition was screaming at me to run, but my greed was screaming louder. I approached the chest, my heart beating like a drum solo in a heavy metal song. I slowly reached for the lid, half expecting a giant tongue to come out and lick me. The chest clicked open, and a blinding light filled the entire room. I shielded my eyes, hoping I wouldn't wake up in a carriage being told I'm finally awake. When the light faded, a small, floating cat with wings was staring right at me. It looked at me with pure judgment, as if it knew I spent my last skill points on fast eating. "Are you the new servant?" the cat asked, and I realized my life was about to get way more annoying. I stared at the cat, wondering if I could trade it for a refund or a ham sandwich. "Servant," I repeated, my voice cracking like a cheap headset during a heated Call of Duty match. The winged furball did a mid-air backflip, looking way too smug for something that could fit in a toaster. It introduced itself as Puff, the self-proclaimed guardian of the trash vault. Apparently, my Trash Master title wasn't just a cruel joke from the universe after all. Puff explained that I could turn absolute garbage into top-tier loot using my hidden potential. Which sounds great, until you realize I have to carry literal trash to be powerful. I asked why he was in a chest, and he claimed he was meditating. Sure, and I'm the CEO of Nintendo. He told me the dungeon was reacting to my presence, which usually means something is about to try and kill me. Right on cue, the room started shaking like a washing machine with a brick in it. A massive health bar appeared at the top of my vision, stretching across the entire ceiling. A dust bunny golem emerged, looking like the stuff under my bed finally gained sentience and a grudge. I pulled out my rusty sword, feeling about as prepared as a sheep at a wolf convention. Puff screamed at me to use my trash conversion skill on the yellow rocks nearby. I grabbed a handful of the fake gold and activated the skill with a desperate prayer. The rocks glowed and transformed into a stack of explosive fool's gold grenades. I chucked the grenades, hoping for a miracle since my combat skills are currently a toddler with a stick level. The golem exploded into a massive cloud of sneeze-inducing dust and pure disappointment. I coughed my lungs out, realizing my fast-eating skill didn't help with inhaling lint. Puff just sat there licking his paw, clearly enjoying my pathetic near-death experience. I wiped the dust off my face, searching the floor for any loot that wasn't covered in ancient grime. Puff floated over, staring at me with the same impatience as a viewer waiting for a skip ad button. "Stop standing around and pick up the core," he hissed, flicking his tail with annoyance. I reached into the pile of lint and pulled out a glowing, pulsating dust core. The system pinged, informing me that I could upgrade my Trash Master level by consuming it. I stared at the fuzzy, glowing ball, wondering if my health insurance covered magical indigestion or lint-related death. I closed my eyes and swallowed it whole, praying it tasted better than it actually looked. A surge of energy hit my veins, and suddenly my trash conversion skill felt significantly more potent. We moved further down the hallway, which was getting narrower and creepier with every step. We eventually hit a massive iron door that looked like it belonged in a maximum security prison. Puff told me the door would only open for someone radiating true garbage energy. I stood there, feeling deeply offended that my very existence was apparently the universal key for trash-themed locks. I placed my hand on the cold metal, and the door groaned open like a tired office worker on a Monday. It revealed a massive chamber filled with mountains of broken pottery and rusted, useless spoons. "Welcome to the junkyard of the gods," Puff announced with way too much theatrical flair. I looked around, realizing that while others saw a dump, I was looking at a legendary armory. I picked up a bent fork, and the system identified it as a god-slaying trident damaged. Seriously? This thing couldn't even slay a piece of overcooked cafeteria steak in its current state. I started shoveling items into my inventory, feeling like a competitive hoarder on a very tight deadline. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed over the pile, and I realized we weren't alone in this dumpster fire. I looked up and saw a mountain of scrap metal standing on two very shaky legs. It was a junk golem, looking like a Transformers reject that lost a fight with an industrial trash compactor. Puff immediately hid behind my head, proving his loyalty was about as solid as wet one-ply toilet paper. The golem let out a metallic screech that sounded like a fork scraping against a ceramic plate. It swung a massive arm made of rusted pipes and broken bicycles right at my face. I dove to the left, barely missing a trip to the afterlife via vintage tricycle. My system interface flickered, highlighting the boss in a bright, glowing, recyclable green. Apparently, this boss was just a giant pile of loot waiting for a trash master to hit the delete key. I activated my trash conversion skill, but the golem resisted with a surge of static energy. Puff yelled that I needed to weaken its core before I could turn it into scrap metal. The core was glowing deep inside its chest, protected by a layer of ancient, crusty frying pans. I pulled out my god-slaying trident fork, which felt about as useful as bringing a toothpick to a tank fight. I lunged forward, stabbing the fork directly into a gap between two rusted radiators. A massive spark erupted, and the golem froze like a Windows 95 PC trying to run a modern AAA game. The damaged fork actually bypassed its defense, sending a shockwave through the entire scrap heap. The golem groaned, its massive body beginning to dissolve into glowing pixels and raw materials. I stood back as a waterfall of iron, ore, and magical essence flooded into my inventory. The system chimed, announcing that I had reached Trash Master Level 5 and unlocked bulk disposal. Puff flew out from his hiding spot, acting like he'd been cheering me on the whole time. I just sighed, wondering how much more divine garbage I'd have to sift through to finish this quest. I started sifting through the pile of loot, hoping for something better than a used toothbrush. Most of it was literal garbage, but my inventory was vacuuming it up like a hungry Roomba. Suddenly, a golden light flashed from the bottom of the heap, nearly blinding me. I pulled out a legendary rusty hubcap that had more legendary energy than my last 3 relationships combined. Puff tried to snatch it, but I swatted him away like a persistent pop-up ad. "Don't touch the merchandise, bird brain," I muttered, tucking the hubcap into my bag. A loud, arrogant voice echoed through the scrap yard, ruining my peaceful looting session. Out stepped a guy in silk robes who looked like he'd never seen hard work, basically a walking skip ad button. He was surrounded by 4 bodyguards who clearly spent more time on their hair than their combat training. "Hand over the golem's core, peasant," the guy sneered, pointing a fan at me. I looked at the spot where the golem used to be, which was now just a very clean patch of dirt. I told him the core was gone, but he looked at me with the same confusion my grandma has when I explain NFTs. His face turned a lovely shade of "I'm about to throw a tantrum" red. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he screamed, reaching for a jade pendant on his belt. I sighed, because apparently every cultivation world has a mandatory "do you know who I am" quota to fill. Puff whispered that this guy was the 3rd son of the city lord, which meant he was a professional brat. The bodyguards drew their swords, and the air got heavy with that classic mid-tier villain energy. My system pinged, suggesting I use bulk disposal on them, which is the most savage way to say delete these NPCs. I gripped my god-slaying fork, feeling the level 5 power coursing through my veins. Sorry, buddy, I said with a grin, but I don't give refunds on recycled trash. The brat's face twitched, clearly not used to being told no by someone who looks like a literal hobo. He snapped his fingers, and the 4 bodyguards lunged at me like they were auditioning for a low-budget action flick. I didn't even blink. I just raised my fork, ready to serve up some justice, extra crispy. The first guy swung his sword, but his form was so bad I actually felt bad for his sensei. I parried his blade with a clink that sounded suspiciously like a cheap kitchen timer. My system popped up a notification, enemy IQ detected at room temperature, initiating counter roast. I swept his legs, and he hit the dirt harder than a crypto coin after a celebrity rug pull. The second bodyguard tried a fancy spin kick, which is a great way to show off your pants, but a terrible way to fight. I just stepped back, and he spun himself right into a pile of scrap metal with a satisfying thud. 2 down, 2 to go, and I haven't even broken a sweat or ruined my favorite trash-picking gloves. The third guy hesitated, realizing he was just a nameless mob in someone else's highlight reel. He charged anyway, screaming a battle cry that sounded more like a tea kettle reaching its boiling point. I poked him with the fork, and the god-slaying energy sent him flying back into his boss. The city lord's son scrambled to his feet, his silk robes now covered in the kind of grime that doesn't wash out. You dare touch the nobility? He shrieked, his voice hitting a pitch only dogs and annoying NPCs can hear. I told him that in my world, nobility is just another word for high-tier loot drop if you're brave enough. He pulled out a glowing jade talisman, probably his get-out-of-jail-free card or a very expensive paperweight. The air began to crackle with energy, making my hair stand up like I'd just rubbed a balloon on my head for an hour. Puff chirped a warning, sensing that this brat was about to summon something way above his pay grade. I tightened my grip on the hubcap, wondering if a legendary car part could actually block a magical nuke. The jade talisman shattered, and a massive phantom of an old man manifested in the sky. Who dares to lay a finger on my grandson? The phantom roared, nearly blowing my eardrums out. Oh look, the classic spirit of the ancestor trope, because rich kids can't even lose a fight without calling their grandpa for a bailout. The spiritual pressure was so heavy it made the ground beneath my feet crack like a dry biscuit. I looked up at the giant glowing ghost and wondered if he knew his grandson was a total tool. My system pinged. Warning, level 50 projection detected. Recommended action, run or find a better lawyer. I didn't run. Instead, I adjusted my trash-picking bag and prepared to recycle this old man's ego. The phantom raised a hand, and a giant palm of golden light descended from the heavens. It was the heavenly palm technique, a move so overused in these stories it should probably have its own copyright lawyer. I held up the rusty hubcap, channeling every bit of god-slaying energy I had into the metal. The collision sounded like a freight train hitting a giant gong, sending a shockwave through the entire city. Dust filled the air, and for a second, I thought I might actually have to pay for my own funeral. But when the smoke cleared, I was still standing, and the hubcap didn't even have a scratch on it. The phantom looked confused, his glowing eyes widening as if he'd just seen a cat bark. Impossible. A mere mortal blocked my strike, he bellowed, his voice cracking with pure disbelief. I told him that his divine power felt more like a lukewarm breeze on a boring summer afternoon. The city lord's son was shaking so hard, he looked like he was trying to vibrate into another dimension to escape the embarrassment. I took a step forward, and the phantom flickered, its energy running low like a phone at 1%. With one final swing of my fork, I pierced the center of the projection, shattering it into golden sparkles. The brat collapsed, finally realizing that even his family tree couldn't save him from a guy with a kitchen utensil. I looked down at the brat, who was currently sobbing like he'd just lost his favorite Minecraft world. So, about that divine protection of yours, it seems to have a bit of a connectivity issue. I reached out and snatched the high-grade storage ring right off his trembling, sweaty finger. You can't do this. My father will have your head, he squeaked between pathetic hiccups. I pointed my fork at his throat, and he shut up faster than a laptop with 0% battery. Your father? You mean the guy who is currently late to pick you up from your own funeral? I scanned the contents of the ring and found a mountain of spirit stones and some questionable poetry. My system chimed, loot secured, wealth increased by 500%, moral compass still pointing to trash. Suddenly, a massive streak of purple lightning tore through the clouds, heading straight for the town square. It was the city lord himself, and he looked like he'd just seen the bill for his son's therapy. He landed with a thud that sent shockwaves through the pavement, looking every bit the final boss archetype. Who dared to humiliate the heir of the Silverleaf clan? He roared, his beard literally sparking. I stepped forward, casually tossing the brat's empty storage ring up and down like a baseball. That would be me, big guy. Also, your son really needs to work on his cardio. The city lord's face turned a shade of red that I'm pretty sure only exists in high-end sports cars. He drew a massive broadsword that was definitely compensating for something, glowing with an ominous purple aura. My system flared up again. New boss fight. The overprotective dad. Difficulty. Why are you still here? I tightened my grip on the rusty hubcap, feeling the god-slaying energy hum against my palm. Listen, I am just here for the recycling. If you are junk, you are going in the bag. He lunged forward, his blade cutting through the air with the sound of 1,000 angry hornets. I sidestepped the strike, feeling the wind whistle past my ears like a missed deadline. The ground where I stood a second ago exploded into a million pieces of expensive-looking marble. I yawned at his attack speed, which was currently slower than a Windows update stuck at 99%. The city lord let out a guttural roar, his purple aura flaring up like a neon sign in Vegas. My system pinged. Warning, boss is entering phase 2. Suggestion, stop being a jerk and actually fight. I raised the rusty hubcap, and it hummed with a power that definitely violated several safety regulations. Our weapons collided, creating a shockwave that sent the nearby spectators flying like ragdolls in a glitchy Bethesda game. The vibration traveled up my arm, but the god-slaying energy absorbed the impact like a memory foam mattress. He swung again, a vertical cleave designed to turn me into a very flat pancake. I parried the massive blade with a flick of my wrist, feeling like a pro gamer in a lobby of noobs. Silver Leaf Secret Art, Violet Dragon's Wrath, he screamed, because apparently, naming your moves makes them stronger. A purple lightning dragon appeared, looking like a budget CGI effect from a low-tier mobile game ad. I didn't even blink. I just adjusted my grip and prepared to send this lizard back to the scrap heap. The hubcap began to glow with a golden light that made the sun look like a dim flashlight. I swung the piece of junk in a wide arc, meeting the lightning dragon head-on in a blinding flash. The dragon shattered into harmless sparks, raining down on the city lord like confetti at a loser's parade. He stood there, frozen in shock, his invincible sword now looking like a glorified butter knife. You know, I said, stepping closer, for a city lord, your combat stats are surprisingly mid. I tapped him with the hubcap, and he went flying like a physics object in a Gary's Mod video. I stood over the fallen boss, wondering if he dropped any loot worth more than his son's bad poetry. The crowd was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, or maybe just the sound of the city lord's ego shattering. I looked down at the invincible leader, who was now coughing up dirt and regret in equal measure. How did a trash master beat me? He wheezed, clinging to his pride like I clinged to my last brain cell during a filler arc. He tried to stand, but his legs were about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. My system pinged. Boss defeated. You have earned 10,000 XP and the City Smasher title. I felt the level up energy hit me, boosting my stats faster than a whale's credit card debt in a gacha game. The guards finally remembered they were on the clock and surrounded me with their spears shaking. I gave them a look that suggested they should start updating their life insurance policies immediately. They took one look at the crater and decided their hourly wage wasn't worth dying for. Wait, please, have mercy on my father, a voice cried out from the palace balcony. A girl in white robes descended, looking like she'd just stepped off the set of a high-budget shampoo commercial. It was the city lord's daughter, looking exactly like every other jade beauty I've seen this week. She knelt before me, her eyes welling up with enough tears to solve a local drought. I rolled my eyes. If I had a nickel for every time a daughter begged for a villain, I'd be retired. I told her that mercy was a premium service and I didn't see any gold on the table. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a glowing jade pendant that practically screamed, "Plot MacGuffin." My system went into overdrive, alerting me that this ancient relic was essential for my next power-up. I took the pendant, feeling the power thrumming through my fingers like a bass drop at a dubstep concert. Fine, he lives, I said, but tell him if he tries this again, I'm bringing a bigger hubcap. I walked away from the wreckage, wondering if the next town had a boss with actual combat skills. I strolled out of the city gates, leaving the smoke of the ruined palace behind me. My system chimed again, probably wanting to nag me about my total lack of cultivation ethics. Host, the jade pendant contains the soul of an ancient sword saint, the system whispered in my head. Great, another old man living in my jewelry. It's basically a retirement home for dead NPCs at this point. I tossed the pendant in the air, catching it with the casual vibe of a seasoned warrior. Suddenly, the road ahead was blocked by a group of guys wearing matching silk robes. Their leader stepped forward, fanning himself like he was auditioning for a historical drama's Most Punchable Face award. Halt, this road belongs to the Azure Cloud sect, he declared, pointing his fan at my chest. I sighed, wondering if these sects had a factory that just churned out identical, arrogant disciples. I told him I was just passing through and didn't have time for his nonsense. He laughed, a high-pitched sound that made me want to uninstall my ears and delete the save file. Hand over that pendant, and I might let you leave with your limbs still attached, he sneered. I looked at the pendant, then at him, and felt my patience finally reaching its limit. I took a step forward, and the ground beneath my feet cracked under the pressure of my aura. The disciples flinched, their tough guy personas evaporating faster than a crypto bro's life savings. You have exactly 3 seconds to move, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. 1, 2, and before I hit 3, the leader pulled out a glowing red talisman. It was a summoning charm, the classic get-out-of-jail-free card for weak villains. A massive shadow began to form in the sky, blocking out the sun with its wings. I cracked my knuckles, ready to show this beast why you never interrupt a trash master's commute. The sky literally ripped open, revealing a giant, scaly claw. out popped a storm-winged manticore, looking like a failed experiment between a lion and an eagle. The sect leader started cackling, thinking he'd just summoned the final boss of my existence. "Behold the guardian of our sect. Kneel before its majesty," he screamed. I just stood there, wondering if the beast's fur would make a good rug. My system popped up a notification saying the threat level was basically 0. Even my own UI was getting tired of these low-level mobs. The manticore let out a roar that shattered the nearby windows. It lunged at me, its wings creating a localized hurricane. I didn't even draw my sword for this oversized house cat. My punch hit the beast harder than a midlife crisis hits a guy in a Corvette. The manticore did a complete 180 in midair and crashed into the dirt. The resulting dust cloud made the road look like a low-budget Michael Bay movie set. When the smoke cleared, the mighty guardian was curled into a shivering ball. The sect leader's fan fell out of his hand as his face turned pale. His disciples were already running away faster than a speedrunner on a world record pace. I walked up to the leader, who was now trembling like a human jackhammer. "So, about that road tax," I said with a dangerous grin. He fumbled with his belt, handing over a spatial ring full of gold. I took the loot and left, feeling like a GTA protagonist who just found the infinite money glitch. I tossed the spatial ring into the air, catching it with a satisfying, expensive-sounding click. Inside was enough gold to make a greedy dragon rethink its entire career path. I started walking toward the capital city, whistling a tune that probably violated copyright laws in 3 dimensions. The road ahead was long, dusty, and filled with the unmistakable scent of upcoming plot armor. Suddenly, I spotted a fancy carriage being surrounded by a group of masked bandits. "Help! Is there no hero in this godforsaken land?" a high-pitched voice cried out. I sighed, because of course there's a damsel in distress within a 5-mile radius of me. The bandits were dressed in all black, looking like a bunch of edgy ninjas who failed their Chunin exams. Their leader stepped forward, waving a rusty sword like he actually knew how to use it. "Hand over the girl and the jewels, and we might let you live," he barked. I leaned against a nearby tree, checking my fingernails for any leftover manticore guts. The carriage door creaked open, revealing a girl with eyes like polished jade. She looked at me with that classic, "Save me, mysterious stranger," expression. My system pinged, identifying her as the third princess of some kingdom I'd never heard of. Great, another high-maintenance NPC who probably has a fetch quest that takes 3 business days to complete. One of the bandits noticed me and started walking over with a smug, punchable grin. "Hey kid, beat it before I turn you into a pincushion," he threatened. I didn't even look up as I flicked a small pebble toward his forehead. The pebble hit him with the force of a freight train, sending him flying into the bushes. The other bandits froze, realizing they had just brought a butter knife to a literal nuclear silo fight. The leader stared at the bush where his buddy just vanished, his brain clearly buffering. What did you do?" he stammered, his sword shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. I yawned so wide I nearly dislocated my jaw, because watching low-level thugs process reality is exhausting. "Get him," the leader screamed, sending his remaining lackeys into a total suicide charge. I didn't even stand up, just swept my leg out in a move that would make a breakdancer jealous. They hit the dirt in perfect synchronization, looking like a budget boy band failing their first dance routine. The princess gasped, her eyes wide with the realization that I was way overqualified for this rescue. I turned my attention to the leader, who was currently reconsidering every single one of his life choices. With a flick of my finger, his legendary rusty sword shattered into a million useless pieces. He didn't wait for a sequel. He just turned tail and ran like he'd seen a ghost. The princess stepped out of the carriage, smoothing her dress as if she hadn't just been screaming for help. "I am Princess Ling, and I owe you my life," she said, sounding exactly like a pre-recorded cutscene. I checked my watch, or I would have, if this world had technology better than a literal pointy stick. "Cool story, Your Highness, but does this rescue come with a cashback guarantee?" I asked. She blinked, clearly not used to people treating her like a common merchant instead of royalty. "I can offer you a place in the palace and gold beyond your wildest dreams," she promised. Gold. Now we're talking my language, even if it means babysitting a royal headache for a week. I hopped onto the driver's seat, taking the reins because the original driver was still out cold. We rolled toward the capital, the city walls looming ahead like a giant, unskippable welcome to the tutorial sign. I could already feel the side quests piling up in my mental inbox, and I hated every second of it. We pulled up to the massive city gates, which were basically begging for a loading screen. 2 guards crossed their spears, blocking our path like they actually got paid enough for this. "Halt, state your business, or get lost," one guard barked with way too much attitude. Princess Ling leaned out and flashed a golden jade token that looked way too expensive. The guards hit the deck faster than a pro gamer dodging a flashbang. We rolled through the capital streets, and the sheer number of people was overwhelming. The locals started whispering, probably wondering why a commoner was driving a royal carriage. We finally reached the palace, a place so shiny it probably cost the taxpayers a fortune. The architecture was impressive, but I was mostly looking for the nearest exit. A stiff-looking official in a fancy robe marched toward us, looking incredibly annoyed. He squinted at me, his nose upturned like he'd just smelled a week-old gym bag. "Princess, who is this unkempt individual?" he asked, his voice dripping with pure judgment. Ling explained how I saved her, but the guy looked like he didn't believe a word. I just sat there, wondering if the palace kitchen served anything better than dry rations. "Enough with the chatter. Where's the gold you promised?" I cut in, killing the vibe instantly. Suddenly, a group of armored knights parted to let a flamboyant noble through. This guy walked in with more sparkles than a magical girl transformation sequence. "A peasant like you shouldn't even be breathing the same air as royalty," he sneered. I looked at my dusty boots and then back at his punchable face, feeling my patience evaporate. If this guy doesn't shut up, I'm going to turn his noble pride into a medical bill. The noble stepped forward, his eyes full of disdain as he looked me up and down. "I am Duke Yan's son, and I won't let a beggar like you sully this hall." He reached for his sword, clearly looking for any excuse to show off his fancy gear. Princess Ling tried to intervene, but he ignored her like a pop-up ad on a sketchy website. I sighed, realizing my peaceful retirement was being delayed by yet another generic, low-level subquest. "Look, Sparky, I'm just here for the paycheck, not a pointless duel." The crowd gasped in shock, as if I had just committed the ultimate social sin. He lunged at me with a speed that was, quite frankly, embarrassing to watch. I sidestepped his attack effortlessly, not even bothered enough to put down my snacks. He stumbled past me, nearly face-planting into a decorative vase worth more than his dignity. "How dare you dodge? Stand still and accept your punishment like a man." I looked at the audience, the guards, and rolled my eyes at this terrible script. This guy clearly had more money than combat experience, and it showed. He swung again, his blade glowing with a faint, flickering aura of fire magic. I caught the blade between two fingers, because physics and logic are strictly for side characters. The sound of his ego shattering was louder than the actual clinking of the metal. Is this the best the capital has to offer? I'm honestly a bit disappointed. The official from earlier looked like he was on the verge of a total meltdown. Princess Ling just covered her face, clearly regretting her decision to bring me here. I flicked the blade, sending the noble flying back into his group of armored guards. He crashed into his squad, taking down 3 armored guards in a single, messy heap. You actually dared to strike me?" he shrieked, his face turning a deep shade of red. He scrambled to his feet, shaking like a glitchy NPC trying to find its pathing after a crash. I just checked my fingernails, completely bored by his predictable and repetitive temper tantrum. The guards looked at each other, hesitant to step forward against someone who moved that fast. The official finally found his voice and begged us to stop before the hall was destroyed. But the noble ignored him, his eyes burning with a mix of pure hatred and humiliation. He pulled out a glowing jade pendant, a high-level artifact radiating a dangerous, swirling energy. A massive wave of pressure filled the room, making the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. I stood there completely unfazed, because my plot armor is thicker than a 1,000-page legal dictionary. Is that all? I felt more spiritual pressure from a mild autumn breeze. Princess Ling just looked away, unable to watch her fellow noble get systematically dismantled. I stepped past the trembling boy and headed toward the inner sanctum to find a real challenge.